When I think about Parker Hill, I don't think about the buildings or the music or necessarily the sermons. Like, I think about the people, and the people were a huge part of growing up. And yeah, I was dedicated as a baby there. Obviously don't remember that. But yeah, it's just always been Parker Hill in my life. Went through all of their student ministry programs in middle school, high school, and really attended from the time I was born all the way up through college. And it was really Parker Hill that got me connected to LCBC when I moved down here after graduating college. It was kind of like a move into Central PA and need to find a church, and it was really the people of Parker Hill that recommended LCBC to me.
So when I had moved down to Central PA, or across from New Jersey, I didn't know anybody, and I was living alone, and I'm just such a social person, total extrovert, but the second that I would get home, I would feel so alone. So as I was going through groups and next steps, eventually ended up writing my story and getting baptized through LCBC, and I felt like my next step was to try and get plugged in. I was able to just connect with other women, just kind of form a group. I have one really great friend that came out of that group.
Like, those relationships that we had and like really shaped like my faith and my perception of like what the church is and how important relationships are in that.
When I first attended Parker Hill, I walked in and I think the first thing that I said was, "This is just like LCBC." From the next steps area to just the kid environments, to the greeting team and the traffic team, just very similar elements. And from viewing LCBC to go to Parker Hill and see similar things was also really comforting. If I had to like sum up LCBC community in one word, I feel like it would be like passionate. I think just passion for what's around them in the community.
I think the cool thing too is like when you look back over the course of your life and like the great times and then the not great times, like a great time like our wedding or something like my dad passing away, like through all of those times, like you remember the people that were there for you and the people from Parker Hill or LCBC that were there to support us. So that's really cool. You know, you look at the missions of Parker Hill and LCBC, they're so similar, and it's all focused on people. And Parker Hill has this For Any PA campaign going that's all about the people of Northeast Pennsylvania. And then you look at the mission of LCBC to introduce people to Jesus and together fully follow him. I mean, it all comes down to like, it's all about people and introducing more people to Jesus. And that's an idea that it's hard not to get on board with.
Well, we just got to say that we are very, very excited and continue to be excited about our strategic partnership with Parker Hill Church, and very excited for the future that we believe that God has in store for our churches together. You know, our dream as a church here at LCBC, our dream is to impact the state of Pennsylvania, which is why we launched locations, 15 different locations currently across eastern and central Pennsylvania. And so many of you have been instrumental in that. So many of you have given, you've contributed, you've given your time, your energy, your resources to seeing this church advance our mission. And we also know that as much ground as we've taken to see more lives changed by Christ, we also know that there is so much more out there that we think God has for our church, to see more lives changed by Christ. And so we just have a real cool opportunity in front of us to take some new ground. And if you've been around, then over the last couple of weeks, last couple of months really, you've heard us talk about the potential of Parker Hill Church merging with us this summer to become part of LCBC. And Parker Hill Church, just to give you a little bit of snapshot real quick, Parker Hill Church is a church of about 2,000 people who are actively involved with 3 different locations up in the Wilkes-Barre, Scranton area. And they have just seen God do some incredible things through their church and in northeastern Pennsylvania over the years. And so we've just been dreaming. We've been dreaming with their leadership and with their staff. And we've just been asking what kind of potential there might be for us to join together as churches to reach more people in northeastern Pennsylvania. And we really do. We really truly believe that we are better together. and that we will be better together. And so we're moving forward right now with plans for Parker Hill to become our 16th, 17th, and 18th locations in the state. And so over the next couple of weeks, I just want to encourage you to do a couple things. First, I just want to encourage you and ask you to join us in praying. And then second, I want to ask you to just be informed. Be informed of what's coming. Be informed about Parker Hill and the opportunities. You can get more information about all of this on our website. And then in early June, we'll be asking, if you're a partner here at LCBC, we'll be asking you to vote to affirm the Parker Hill officially joining us as we keep moving the mission forward and introducing more people to Jesus. Well, listen, today we are in week 3 of our series, Uncensored. And so in this series, what we're doing is we're just looking at some of those uncensored statements of Jesus. Statements that Jesus made that are a little bit disruptive and yet lead us into the best kind of life. And in particular, we've been looking at statements that Jesus made while he gave the longest speech that we actually have recorded for us in the New Testament that Jesus gave. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. It's found in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And what's been so fun, man, I'm just telling you, so many of you have taken us up on the challenge to take time every day through the month of April and just read the Sermon on the Mount. It's 111 verses, 3 chapters. It's not that complicated, and so many of you have done that. And we still have one more week to go in April, and so if you haven't jumped in, man, it's not too late. Jump in. Just do it for this last week of April. Read every day the Sermon on the Mount, and I guarantee you won't regret that. As I've been reading the Sermon on the Mount, so I've been doing it as well, and as I've been doing it each and every day, I've had varying reactions as I've read the Sermon on the Mount to some of these uncensored words of Jesus. A couple of weeks ago, I was putting my youngest child, his name is Solomon, he's my son, my youngest son, to bed, and so I'm tucking him in, and one of the things I used to do with my kids, I got a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, so we got a little bit of a gap there, and some of my older ones, they don't let me do this to them anymore, of course. I'm not tucking them anymore, but when I used to tuck them in when they were little, it kind of became a tradition. I would just sing them this song, and made up this song, and it's a really simple song. It just repeats the words, "I'm so proud of you." That's it, "I'm so proud of you." So I'm carrying on this tradition with Solomon, and I haven't sang it to him yet. I'm gonna this is a good time to start this little tradition again. So I have Solomon in my arms right before I'm about to put him down. It's this tender moment. I'm holding him because I can still hold him even though he's about to be 3 in a couple of weeks. I'm still holding him like this now because he's giant. And I look into his eyes and I just start going, "I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you. Solomon, I'm so proud of you." And he looks at me with these big brown eyes locked in on mine. And he reaches up and just goes, I was like, "That's messed up, man. Your college fund just got docked, man. Like, what's up with that?" I'll be honest though, there have been so many times as I've read the Sermon on the Mount over the last couple weeks, so many times when I read some of the words of Jesus, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to cover my ears up. I don't want to hear this. It's too challenging, too disruptive. So when I read the Sermon on the Mount and I read in Matthew chapter 7 when Jesus says, "Don't judge other people," I want to put my hands up on my ears. I'm like, I thought that was the whole point of becoming a Christian. I thought you became a Christian so you could just judge everybody now. Jesus is like, nope. Jesus says to pray for your enemies, to bless those who persecute you. I want to put my hands over my ears. I've just been reminded as I've read this, and so many of you, I think you've been experiencing this as well, of how challenging and yet at the exact same time compelling the uncensored words of Jesus are. And in particular, there's this theme that you will see today that Jesus seems to harp on continually. It's a theme that comes out in so many ways. It's a theme that makes its way all through the Sermon on the Mount, and it's this: you cannot be right with God and be wrong with others. You can't be right with God. In other words, have a right relationship with God and yet care nothing about your relationships with others. You can't say that you care about this vertical relationship, me and God, while at the same time, you really don't do anything to develop these relationships. In fact, you live with cruelty. Sometimes you're mean, sometimes you ignore, sometimes you do all this kind of stuff. And Jesus is saying, that's inconsistent. Can't do that. And today, what we're gonna look at 10 verses, that's it. 10 verses from the Sermon on the Mount that put this reality on full display. And as you hear some of the things we're gonna talk about, you may wanna cover your ears a few times. Because Jesus is gonna address 3 topics which might look unrelated on the surface, but as we're about to see in a minute, they are tied together. And those topics are lust, divorce, and lying. See, I told you want to cover your ears right now, don't you? But don't, because God may have something to say to us today. If you have a Bible, man, I would love for you to turn to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, if you've got a mobile device out, go ahead and scroll there. Matthew chapter 5. And I just wanted to take a look at some of these uncensored words of Jesus and how, again, it affirms the connection between relationship with God and relationship with others, that they're intimately tied together. This is what it says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 27. Jesus starts by saying, he says, you've heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery. It's one of the 10 commandments. Everybody sitting there that day nods their head and says, yeah, good. Wipe the sweat off my brow. Haven't done that, so I'm good to go. Jesus is like, I'm not done. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. In other words, all that was missing is the opportunity. He's already gone there. So if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out. Throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your hand, even your stronger hand, causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. I don't know, but I'm imagining this is the point of the Sermon on the Mount where all the men in the audience suddenly need to go to the restroom. Like, this is getting a little bit awkward, making me squirm a little bit here. Jesus starts by talking about something that they all knew. The 10 Commandments, right? He says, you've heard it said, you know the law, you know the 10 Commandments, do not commit adultery. Everybody agrees on that. We all got that. Jesus says, but I'm about to push it way further. Because Jesus isn't just interested in us getting our behaviors modified. He doesn't want just to get our behaviors right. He wants to change our hearts, the places where those behaviors come from. And Jesus is saying that you can avoid the act of adultery your entire life. You can go your whole life having avoided the act of adultery, and you still live in warped sexual relationships with people because of the way you think about them. So let's just talk about lust for a second. And let's start by just talking about what Jesus is not saying about lust. First of all, lust is not thinking sexually about your spouse. And I need to say that because every now and then I'll get that question like, I feel like I'm lust because my wife and I think things. Like, look, if you are in a marriage relationship, covenant relationship, you belong to each other. You can only lust for something that doesn't belong to you. When you marry, you belong to each other. You can't lust for your spouse. Have at it. Go for it. God gave us sexual intimacy to thrive in marriage. So lust is not, you can't lust after your spouse. The other thing, lust is not seeing and noticing an attractive person. Just because you notice someone's attractive doesn't mean you're lusting. Lust is not being tempted to carry out thoughts sexually about another person. Sexual desire is a human desire. It's a human thing. So it's not just being tempted with it. What Jesus is talking about, he's talking about the decision we make to then play out sexual fantasies about someone else in our thinking and in our mind. This is why he said, by the way, did you catch it? He says, anyone who looks with lust, not just looks at someone, but looks with lust. Another translation could say that when you look with the purpose of lusting. A couple years ago, Jenny and I, we were in New York City, and if you've been to New York, then you know that, there's these, every now and then you'll go down a street and it just has these giant billboards that are like the size of buildings. I mean, they'll cover entire sides of buildings, these images. So we're walking down the street and Jenny says to me, do not look up there. That's a trap, guys. I'm just saying. Because what is the very first thing I did? Looked up there. And up there was a 20-story image of a woman wearing nothing but 4 strands of dental floss. Not much. Now that's not lust. But looking again and again with the purpose of playing out some fantasy, of playing that out in my imagination, that's what Jesus is talking about. Lust is grasping and it's taking what doesn't belong to you. Lust is a craving to possess someone else. See, this is exactly why Jesus dives into this subject with these uncensored words. The sin of lust is not that it makes us somehow impure, sexually impure. That's not it. The sin or the issue with lust is that it treats another human being who was created sacred, created in the image of God. It treats them as if they are an object. to be used and then thrown away, discarded. Where it leads to us rating women and rating men on a number scale. That's objectifying them. It leads to us talking about people as if they're just body parts. That's objectifying them. It leads to us using them for our own sexual gratification, and then we're done with them like a paper plate that we use to eat and get our fill, only to throw it in the trash and discard it. And Jesus is saying that when you think of others as objects, you rob them of their humanity, and in the process, you lose a little bit of yours as well. That is not how I designed you to live. Which is why Jesus makes such a strong, sort of exaggerative, hyperbolic statement when he says, so do whatever it takes, like gouge out your eye if you need to, cut off your arm if you need to, do whatever it takes to not go down this road, because it will have a disintegrating effect on you. He's obviously not talking literally here about gouging out eyes and cutting off arms, because you know as well as I do, and Jesus knew, that you can have no eyes and no arms and still lust after people. That's not gonna solve it. But this is a matter of pressing importance. That's what Jesus is saying, because you will not grow up into who you were made to be when you treat others like they're objects. And I just wanna take a second, I wanna speak to men real quick. High school students, guys, college students, older men, younger men, fathers, husbands, just listen up real quick. And yes, I realize that lust is not specific to men. It's not an issue that only men deal with. I got that, I understand. Don't send me an email. But since Jesus directed this at men, I'm gonna follow his lead for just a second. Guys, you know what this means for us? Two implications. The first one is this. Some of us here today, we may need to cut something out of our life right now because it's fueling lust in us. And we're beginning to objectify women. Some of us, we may need to get drastic with this. That's part of what Jesus is saying. We may need to sever a relationship. You may need to cut a cord, pull out a plug, cancel a subscription, throw something in the trash. You may need to unfollow someone or cut off access to social media. Some of us may need to take very decisive action on this. And it could be painful, but oh so worth it. The second implication is this, is that eventually though, men, listen, eventually we've got to move past just avoiding triggers for lust. In other words, the place that Jesus ultimately wants to move us is not simply that we avoid women. That's not the point. Avoiding women, by the way, so that we don't lust is ironically, implicitly, still treating them as if they're just bodies. Women are not the problem. Jesus never avoided women. Jesus saw them. You know what he did? He saw them for who they were. Sacred, created by their heavenly Father to be cherished, honored, and never used. Jesus is saying, look, if you want me to be king of your life, if you want me to be the ruler, and I realize not everyone does, but if you want me to lead you into something so much greater, it's gonna mean that you have to begin to think of others like I would. And playing out fantasies and your thinking about others is destructive because you will inevitably begin to see others as objects and property to be used. And how we think will eventually make its way out into how we treat others, which is why he jumps to the next topic. Look what he says next. He says, you've heard the law that says that a man can divorce his wife by merely giving her a written notice of divorce. But I say that a man who divorces his wife, unless she's been unfaithful, he causes her to commit adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman also commits adultery. Now, there's a lot of context here we need to understand with this passage. Jesus is weighing in on an incredibly significant issue in the first century, and it's important to have a little bit of context about what Jesus is addressing here. Not unlike today, divorce was extraordinarily common in the first century, very commonplace for lots of different reasons, and it was incredibly easy, actually easier then than it actually is today, for a man to divorce his wife. All he needed to do was wake up in the morning, hand her a notice of divorce, done. In fact, it was so common that there was this debate that sort of erupted in the culture at that point around this time as to what constituted moral grounds to divorce someone, because it was happening so often, so frequently. And there were a few sort of predominant opinions about this, like what really constituted a legitimate reason for divorce. One was that the only legitimate ground for divorce was when the marriage covenant was broken by infidelity. But there was another posture or another position that was out there that was widely accepted and being used en masse, and it was that you could divorce your wife for anything. In fact, there's actually one writing that had circulated around this time by one of the religious leaders that even gave the example of it being acceptable to divorce your wife if her, quote, form didn't please you anymore. It's like, oh, that person's hotter, see ya. There's actually another document that's around in the first century that stated that if you had a legitimate reason to divorce your wife if she oversalted your food. Guys, listen, real quick. My first year of marriage, Jenny, she wanted this one night to be real special, so she baked an apple pie. I came in, I smelled that apple pie, I was like, damn, man, glad I married this woman. I took one bite of that apple pie, it was the worst thing I've ever put in my mouth. So we started talking, I was like, what in the world happened? And we realized that instead of putting a cup of sugar in it, she put a cup of salt. Guys, deer were like coming from miles around just to lick that thing. It was so bad. And I'm happy to say she's so much better now. And see, in the first century, had that happen, she gone, right? Like, she's done. And Jesus comes along and he throws an absolute bomb into all of this thinking, into all of this system. He's doing a few things actually that are extremely relevant for us today. First is this: Jesus always affirms that marriage is sacred and divorce was never God's intent. Now, don't misunderstand what Jesus is saying. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. That doesn't mean that there are not sufficient reasons to divorce every now and then. But those broken situations were never God's intent. Look, I don't think I need to convince you of the devastating effects that divorce has had on families and children and financial stability and stress. I have a lot of friends who are divorced, got a lot of friends who are divorced, for some of them for very legitimate reasons, and none of them would sit here today and tell you, yeah, it's no big deal. Doesn't matter what brought the circumstances about. It's painful. It's heart-wrenching. The second thing that Jesus does is he affirms, and he always affirms, that marriage is a lifelong covenant between man and woman, which is why he referenced it in other passages in the New Testament as marriage making us one flesh with our spouse. And why he reaffirmed the statement that what God has joined together, let no one separate. Which means this: if you're here today and you're a follower of Jesus, and if you're not a follower of Jesus, that's fine. You're kind of off the hook on this one. But if you are here today and you are a follower of Jesus, and you are seeking to divorce your spouse because they don't make you happy anymore, because you're just not fulfilled, whatever that means, or just because you don't feel anything for them, guys, listen, that's the modern day equivalent of oversalting your food. Or taking off the table. What's interesting to me is that Jesus does, though, qualify some of his uncensored words here about divorce. He does talk about exceptions for divorce, particularly when there's sin in the marriage, and particularly the sin of adultery is what he references here. And then Paul, the Apostle Paul, one of the very first leaders in the church, just a few years after Jesus spoke these very words, he writes this letter to the first Christians living in Corinth. You can find this in 1 Corinthians 6 and 7. And he's trying to work out the implications because divorce is an issue there, and they're trying to figure out. And he actually gives another exemption or exception for divorce, being that if you have an unbelieving spouse who wants out and they're unrepentant, they're unwilling to turn to God. And the principle between the two, between what Jesus says here and what Paul says in the other New Testament writings, it seems to be this. It seems to be that there may be room to talk when you have a spouse who's living and acting in unrepentant sin. But even then, and this is so important, it's a big but even then, it may be permissible, but it's not prescribed. Doesn't mean you have to. And see, the bigger point on this passage on divorce, it is not, okay, so Jesus, so what can I get away with in order to get out of this? That's not the point. That's the question they were asking in the first century. The point is, for you and I to sit down with our spouse and to wrestle out in our thinking and in our heart, what would it look like to love my spouse so faithfully, so sacrificially, that they would experience God's love through me? And guys, I know people committed to Jesus who've asked that question, and they have concluded that even though it was permissible to divorce, they wouldn't. And on the other side, I've got friends who are deeply committed to Jesus who concluded that even though the marriage needed to end because of unrepentant sin, the way that they would end it would be full of grace and love in the way they treated their spouse. But what isn't an option for followers of Jesus is to just easily dismiss our spouse because they fail us. And I just want to talk to you, some of you real quick, just if your marriage is on the rocks today. Because I realize that some of you, you're in that situation. Your marriage is barely hanging on. And here's what I want you to know. If your marriage is barely making it right now, and it's not because of some moral failure, but rather it's just because the natural drifting apart that takes place between spouses, that's normal, you know. The natural drifting apart, the failures that the spouses just give each other. If you are a follower of Jesus, if that's what's happened to you and you're in a bad place right now in your marriage, here's what I want you to know. You have the resources of heaven at your disposal to learn to love your spouse that has become a stranger in your home. And yes, it could be a long road ahead, and it could feel like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but I have seen, and we could tell you stories of marriages that were on the ropes that came back to life when both spouses made the decision to give their first allegiance to Jesus Christ. And then I also realized that some of you are here, divorce is part of your story. And over the years, man, I have heard some horrible stories from some of you about churches that you used to be a part of or faith communities that you were a part of when you were younger, and you were thrown out or you were discarded when you had to make the difficult choice to end a marriage. And here's what I want you to hear loud and clear, and here's what I want you to know, that if you're here and you're divorced, you have a place in our church. You are not damaged goods. It is not a scarlet letter that you have to wear. God's grace is big enough for all of us. And you're loved here. Jesus, he just keeps driving home this idea. You can't be right with God and wrong with others. And by treating them as objects, you're wrong with others. Or by discarding them easily because they fail you, that's wrong with others. And then he dips into one last area. Look what he says next in verse 33. He just says, You've also heard that our ancestors were told that you must not break your vows. You must carry out the vows that you make to the Lord. But I say, don't make any vows. Just don't even go there. Don't make any vows. Don't say by heaven, because heaven is God's throne. Don't say by the earth, because the earth is his footstool. Don't say by Jerusalem, for Jerusalem is the city of the great king. Don't even say by my head, for you can't turn one hair white or black. I learned this the hard way after I turned 40. That's very true. Just say a simple, yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond this is from the evil one. I remember the very first time I ever got duped by someone who had their fingers crossed. That's not a good feeling. You know, remember that when you were children and you make a promise or something happens, and you're like, no, I have my fingers crossed. It opened up whole new possibilities for me though. I'm like, that's all I have to do to get out of something? Well, that's easy, I can do that. This is actually kind of this idea is what Jesus is diving into here. There was this elaborate system of rules about oaths and promises in the first century, particularly around which oaths you really had to keep and which ones you could break because they don't really count. One example is that there was this rabbi in the first century who said that if you swear by Jerusalem, you're not bound by your vow. But if you swear toward Jerusalem, then you are bound by your vow. You have to follow through. In other words, their system had legalized telling lies in order to get what you wanted. It was kind of the adult version of, it doesn't count, I have my fingers crossed. And if you want to get a little bit higher level view of what Jesus is addressing here, Jesus is talking about when we use our words to manipulate others in order to get what we want. And guys, we do this all the time, don't we? Sometimes what we want is we want them to have a favorable impression of us, and so we spin an image of ourselves that isn't completely true. Sometimes what we want is we want another person to respect us, and so we embellish our accomplishments. Sometimes what we want is we want their business, and so we give them flattery that we know is disingenuous, or we hide certain aspects of our product so they don't see the downside of it. And Jesus cuts to the chase as to why we do this so often. It's to get our way, even if it means lying and manipulating in order to get it. And when Jesus says to let your yes be yes, let your no be no, he's actually painting what I believe is an incredibly compelling picture of what kind of life he's inviting us into. Jesus is inviting us into a life that is lived with such honesty and transparency and integrity that we don't need to make oaths. We don't need to sell ourselves, and we don't need to hide. That's the nature of integrity. Integrity, at its most fundamental level, just means to be integrated across all areas of life. Who you are here is the same as who you are here. Who you are at school is the same as who you are at your home. Who you are at work is the same as who you are in your neighborhood, right? There's no hiding. There's no manipulating. You aren't covering up. You live honest, transparent lives. You want to know what integrity feels like? It feels so good, man. You know what integrity feels like? No worries when your spouse looks through your phone. Integrity feels like no worries when your parents look through your phone. Integrity feels like no worries when someone digs into your finances. Integrity feels like no worries if someone were to see your computer search history. Integrity means that you are the same person through and through. You live honest. And as a result, the people around you are honored with truth. Guys, listen, it would be hard to overstate how pressing an issue all of this is for Jesus. Because people were hiding behind religious camouflage, keeping all the laws. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. Good, haven't done that. You've heard it said, you have to give your wife or your spouse a certificate of divorce. Okay, good, done that. You've heard it said, the vows thing, just make sure you do the vows right. You've heard all that. They were keeping all the rules, all the religious requirements. They were going to church, they were reading the Bible, all that kind of stuff. All to be able to say, yep, me and God, we're good. I've kept all the rules. But then they were going out and treating others like they were objects. Dropping their spouse the second they failed them. And manipulating others to get their way. And Jesus says, that's no way to live. And you can't be right with God and wrong with others. I'm calling you into something so much greater, to see people differently. I brought a few things from home that are actually really special to me. Things that we actually display and that we have in our home. This is a turtle. I don't know if you can tell that. This is a little turtle that my daughter, she's in high school now, but I don't know when it was, 10, 11, 12 years ago. She's probably 4 years old, something like that. And I remember the day. I remember everything about the day we went to this pottery shop and she made this turtle and she painted this turtle and she put it in the kiln and then it came out and it was glazed. And I remember the weather that day. I remember the smile on her face when she saw this thing come out. And this turtle sits on a shelf in our bonus room, proudly displayed, reminding us of that daddy-daughter date day. I've got this letter here, and this letter contains some of the most precious words I've ever received. And it's from my 12-year-old son, Silas. And this letter has a special place in my office. No one will ever know because I'm not letting anybody, it's between me and him, and I cherish this. And then I got this. This is our latest edition that's been displayed. This is Solomon. A couple days ago. Look, I'm not saying he's Picasso, okay? But we proudly put this on our refrigerator. And I realized that none of these things would mean anything to you. It wouldn't mean much to someone else. It would just be decoration or trash or just an object. But to me, it's embedded with meaning. Why? Because of who created it. It has intrinsic value that I can't even really fully articulate because of who created it. Guys, listen, how you treat the creation reveals how you feel about the Creator. How you treat the creation reveals how you feel about the Creator. And every single person that you will ever encounter on screen, on your computer, on your phone, in person, near or from a distance, every single person you will ever encounter, they have a Creator. And the ultimate invitation today is to see every single person that you have ever locked eyes with as created by your heavenly Father, worthy of love. So I think Jesus would ask us, how have you been treating people? The creation. Have you been using people as objects? Lust, like their property. Treating them, and they're thinking like they belong to you. And if Jesus is pressing in on that for you today, maybe just start here. Maybe what you need to take out of today is just this prayer, just this thing you may need to say 1,000 times, they don't belong to me. Anytime lust wells up, the temptation, anytime that swells up inside of you, anytime you begin to feel that, anytime you feel that desire, whatever, they don't belong to me. They're not property, they don't belong to me. So I will dignify them in my thoughts. They don't belong to me. They're not mine. They're not property to be possessed. So I will dignify them with my thoughts. Maybe for you, what Jesus is pushing in on today is you've dismissed your spouse. You've cut them off because the feelings have faded. And if so, maybe you just need to start here today just with this prayer. It's almost a commitment. Say, my spouse's failures, they don't determine my level of faithfulness. My spouse's failures do not determine my level of faithfulness. I'm faithful to my King. And because of that, I will be faithful to my spouse even when they fail me. Or maybe Jesus is pressing in on you how you've spent your time and energy using your words to take advantage of people or to manipulate or to stay in control. And if that's you, maybe you just start here. Just say, man, I will honor them by being honest. When you want to hide this week, when you want to manipulate, when you want to spin that image of yourself, nope, I will honor them by being honest, even if it costs me. I will honor them by being honest, even if it costs me. Guys, the vision that Jesus is giving us for our lives is that he wants to transform us into people who live with dignity, faithfulness, and honor. And let's be honest, don't you want those words to describe you? Don't you want to be known as that? That is a greater life, where we treat the creation with dignity, honor, and faithfulness, because we know their Creator. So today, we're just going to end our time by singing a song. And if you're in one of our buildings, I just want to ask you to stand. Would you just stand? Everybody right now, just stand to your feet. We're going to sing this song. A song that we sang before. And this song, it just states our intention to allow Jesus to be our King, to lead us into new life. And let's just declare today that whatever area Jesus may be pressing in on with his uncensored words today, whatever area that might be, we will trust him, that his ways are always for our good. Would you just pray with me? God, we are so grateful that you have given us so much wisdom for how to live life at the fullest. And it's challenging, and it's convicting at times, and it's disruptive at times. But we trust today that it's good. We trust that it's good. And Jesus, we just pray that we would be a group of people that would treat your creation with the dignity and honor and love that it so is worthy of, because we know the Creator. So Jesus, we're going to trust you and we're going to follow you as our King, because we know that your ways are always good. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Let the King of my heart be the
Guys, listen, our King is so good, always good. And his invitation for us to surrender to him, it may be a bit disruptive, and it may challenge us in so many ways, but he can always be trusted, that his way is best. And so he says to us, just follow me. Follow me. Follow me in the way that you treat other people. And you watch how I bring you to life as a result. If you're in one of our buildings today and would like to pray with someone about anything, then you can come down to the front left of your room even now, and we would just love to have the chance to pray with you. And if you're online and you would like to pray with anyone, the chat will stay open for the next few minutes, and we'd be honored to pray with you. So LCBC, may the Lord bless and protect you, and may the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. Thank you so much for being here. We'll see you next week.